The Porsche Taycan is the sportiest and most driver-dynamic focused EV sedan on the market. But where it excels in dynamics, there is room for improvement in other areas such as range, charging, and overall efficiency. Porsche took note and has given the Taycan a massive mid-cycle refresh that aims to improve its deficiencies, plus giving it something that I didn't think it really needed. Let's dive in and unpack the details on this new Taycan. Let's get it started by thanking Porsche of downtown LA. If you're interested in the new Taycan or any other Porsche product, give them a call using the information I've left in the description. So let's start off with the exterior changes on this refreshed Taycan. New fenders, they're flatter than before, and they highlight the overall width of the Taycan much more. Next, new headlights. They're called LED HD Matrix, and they're sporting a new design. That, when paired with the revised fascia, means the quote-unquote teardrop headlight is now gone. The taillight design out back is very subtle, and truth be told, I can't really tell the difference between the old one and the new one out here, but overall, I do like the look of this new design better. I think the front looks cleaner, simpler, and more modern. What do you think of it? Now let's get to the real meat and potatoes and talk numbers, starting out with the battery increase. The base Taycan has two battery options, the Performance and Performance Plus. Both see increases across the board. The base battery goes from 79 kilowatts an hour to 89, and the Performance Battery Plus, that's been bumped to 105 kilowatts, increasing from 93. More juice also means more horsepower and torque, of course. The base Taycan now makes 402 horsepower and 272 pounds-feet of torque, 302 with launch control, which is an increase of 81 horsepower and 18 pounds-feet of torque. The Performance Battery Plus nets you an additional 27 horsepower for a total of 429. More output also means better acceleration. With either battery, the base Taycan now goes from 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, down from 5.1. The refreshed Taycan also gets air suspension as standard across the entire lineup, with the option of Porsche Active Ride, which first debuted in the new Panamera. So horsepower and torque weren't really the biggest complaints about the Taycan. It was mainly range and charging. The EPA estimated at 208 miles on the smaller battery and 242 miles on the bigger Performance Plus. Now, both of these numbers were pretty underwhelming considering the competition, but that changes now because the 2025 Taycan achieves 274 miles on the small battery and 318 miles on the Performance Plus. Now, what about charging? Well, that's been improved as well because the new Taycan can charge on a 800-volt network, which means faster charging. 320 kilowatts on the big battery, 270 kilowatts on the smaller battery, an increase of 50 and 40 kilowatts respectively. Now, what all of this translates to? Faster charging in general. If you were to charge from 10 to 80%, it could do it in 18 minutes, making this refreshed Taycan one of the fastest charging cars on the market. The rest of the changes are fairly minor, but worth noting. The interior looks identical to the pre-refresh, but the software has been enhanced. The most noticeable thing will be some refreshed layouts in the infotainment system and better functionality from Apple CarPlay, giving owners the ability to adjust settings such as the radio, AC, ambient lights, and more directly from your phone through Apple CarPlay. Porsche has also thrown in some more standard features to sweeten the pot. Things like lane change assist, heated steering wheel, ambient lighting, electric folding mirrors, cool smartphone tray for your wireless charger, and a drive mode, just to name a few. Now, unfortunately, all of these changes are coming at a cost. The entire Taycan range sees an average price increase of 7.7%, with this base rear-wheel drive model with the smaller performance battery increasing almost 10%, now starting at $101,000, up from $92,000. But let's put the pricing increase aside for a second and see how the increased horsepower and air suspension translate to the driving dynamics. All right, so let's see what this Taycan's got. So a reminder, 402 horsepower, 272 pounds-feet of torque. And if you use launch control, it gets a bump up to 302 pounds-feet of torque. as a rundown, this car is riding on the 21-inch Spider RS wheels, and I'm sitting in a 14-way seat. So the ride comfort might be a little different if you get the stock 19 or 20-inch setup, I believe. So a rundown of the battery. It looks like I'm about 85% charged, and the car is showing 198 miles of range. When I turn the AC on, it drops it down to 179. All right, so let's set the car up. I've got drive modes. So I'm going to put it in sport. Chassis automatically goes in sport. I also have Sport Plus for the chassis. The ride height with the air suspension has 4 different settings: lift, normal, lowered, and low. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in low. I can feel it dropping down. Very cool feeling. And the overall driving position for the Taycan is unlike any other. It feels very, very much like a Porsche product, like a 911, and just in general like a sports car. So let's let this traffic get by very quickly. We're going to do an acceleration pull from a roll, and then we'll do one using launch control. So I am going 7 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour, 5, mash. Oh, oh yeah. And you can feel the second gear engaging around 60 miles an hour. Let me slow down a little bit. Oh yeah, the instant torque and the power of the EVs are just unmatched. Totally unmatched, really, really fast. Can I feel the difference? Yeah, I can feel the difference between the base rear-wheel drive I drove pre-refresh. Let's go again, now 15 miles an hour. Oh, it digs and it really just takes off. And it's a fun dynamic feeling with the second gear in the transmission. You obviously don't get that in any other car except for the Audi e-tron, which is basically the same platform as this. But now let's try the launch control. So if I remember correctly, you got to be in sport, foot on the brake, hold, launch control activated. Let's see. Okay, pretty good, pretty good. Not as violent as a 4S or a Turbo S, but it definitely pushes you back into your seat, gives you that EV instant thrust that is basically unmatched in ICE or gas-powered cars. All right, let's put it back in normal mode and let's talk about some of the differences here. All right, so can I feel the difference? As I mentioned, yes, absolutely I can. It feels a little bit more eager to get up and go. Not that I felt that the Taycan, the pre-refresh, needed the extra power. I thought 321 horsepower, I think it has that much or had that much, was more than enough because EV cars, they feel faster than they are because of that instant torque. And in daily driving situations, when you want to go, it just goes. So that, I guess, underwhelming, as people would call it, 321 horsepower in the base Taycan, I thought was bogus and more than enough. But this kind of puts it over the top. 400 horsepower in, let's assume people are going to drive these mostly in a daily basis situation, and the additional power is always nice, and it's just a wonderful car. The extra power is definitely felt in the refresh. I'll put it to you that way. And there is also another feature which this car does not have. It's the push to go or something like that. And then on the drive mode selector, there's a little button, and think of it like Sport Response in the 911 or in the Boxster. And basically what it does is it gives you a little bit of extra juice for 10 seconds, but you need the Performance Battery Plus, so the bigger battery, and Sport Chrono, which neither option is spec'd for this car. Now let's move to something else, the braking. So I read that the Taycan has a little bit of a weird non-progressive braking feel, and I never felt that way. I've driven the base Taycan, the 4S, the Turbo S. I believe I've driven the Turbo as well, and not once did I feel that the braking felt weird. So as I came back into this car, I wanted to retest that, and I still feel the same way. I feel like the brake pedal is totally normal. It's nice and grabby at the top, which is kind of what I like, but it doesn't give you that non-linear feel where everything is just like you're just doing this every time you brake, and I don't feel that way whatsoever. So I'm not sure what the concern is with the Taycan and the braking feel, but I don't have any concerns whatsoever. Now, one of the things that Porsche did change, let's go ahead and put it back in the normal mode for the ride height. But one of the things that Porsche did change for the braking feel, I'm sorry, not the braking feel, but the brake recuperation, is that it generates 30% more power, I suppose. So the way that translates is when you're braking, the Taycan now recuperates more power, more battery. So when I'm pressing the brake here, I'm recovering 30% more energy than I would have in the pre-refresh. So that's always good for daily driving situations. If you're in traffic, it's a wonderful bonus that Porsche has dialed into the refresh here. So plus there, and that dials into that efficiency gain that Porsche is trying to do with this refresh. Now let's switch over into another big topic, and that's the suspension. So the suspension is now riding on air shocks across the entire lineup, and the base model is where it sees a benefit, because the base model had a fixed suspension prior to the refresh, so fixed springs, and you have adaptive shocks. Now you've got air shocks. So this gives you the ability to lift and lower the car. So not only making it look cooler, but in my opinion, I feel like it gives it a much wider bandwidth. Not that the fixed shock, the fixed suspension was uncomfortable. I feel like this car is very comfortable. The two-chamber air shock I've seen in the Cayenne is, I think, replicated here. I think it's the same ones from the Panamera, actually. And I really like the way this suspension feels because of the extra bandwidth. So in comfort mode, or in normal mode as Porsche calls it, chassis in normal and the level, the ride height in normal, everything feels nice. It soaks up the bumps nicely. And cop here. Sorry for the distraction. The police turned their lights on there. All right, so where was I? Yeah, in comfort mode, everything in normal, it just rides beautifully. So this is a daily driver dream. I'm driving here in downtown LA streets, which are pretty bumpy, and I must say I'm sitting really comfortably in the seat, and I don't feel any of these road imperfections coming in. The two-chamber suspension is really good. Now, one interesting thing I like to talk about with air suspensions is riding it in its lowest level. So if I leave the drive mode and the chassis in normal, and I put the level in low, in its lowest setting, how does it feel? Is it still compliant? Because putting the Taycan in its lowest level, giving it that slammed look, does look cooler. So can I drive it this way on a daily basis? I think you can. It does feel a little bumpier when you go over roads. What I was just describing earlier, it kind of soaks up the bumps. That kind of degrades a little bit, but I feel like you can absolutely drive this car in normal, and low. But where it gets a little unbearable is if you put the chassis in Sport Plus and then you leave it in low, you're really stiffening up the wheel, you're stiffening up the shocks, you're stiffening up the ride height is already kind of bumpy and low. And in my opinion, I would stay away from this, because even when you're going over little imperfections on the road, the stiffness of the shock and the low ride height kind of combine for something that isn't really pleasant for daily driving situations. Although I could still see people saying, okay, you know what, I want the sport feel and I want the lowered ride height, and this is just the way I want to drive it. So still adequate. But overall, what do I think of the refreshed Taycan? The extra power is great. The additional bonus you get if you were going with the base, now that you get the air shock, you get a little bit more comfort. And the bandwidth, when you switch it over into sport mode, makes it feel sporty and it stiffens up. And that plays directly into the character of the Taycan. So I think it's an overall plus and a thumbs up in terms of driving dynamics with this refresh for this new Cayenne. I'm sorry, for the new Panamera. So that's all I've got for driving dynamics. Now let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. So that's the refreshed Porsche Taycan. Now to close it out, I did want to touch on the price increase. And yes, I do understand it's gone up 10%. But let's look at the other areas of improvement. So range is improved by 31%, horsepower by 22%, acceleration by 12.5%. The battery charges faster and is more efficient. The battery capacity is larger, and you get standard equipment that you would have had to pay for in the pre-refresh. Now, in my opinion, yes, $10,000 is a lot of extra money. But considering all the improvements that have been made to the refreshed Taycan, I think it's pretty justified. Now that's all I've got. If you've got any questions, please make sure you leave me a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram at DriveSteady. If you happen to be interested in a pre-refresh Taycan, here's some videos that I've done in the past. Another thank you to Porsche of downtown LA. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.